Mapping the Way. On June 20th, 1803, having just made the Louisiana Purchase, President Thomas Jefferson enlisted U.S. Army Captains Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to lead an expedition called the Corps of Discovery. Their mission was to explore the Missouri River and to see if any of the waterways off the Missouri River led to the Pacific Ocean. Jefferson wanted to find the most direct water route to the West Coast because he knew this would make it easier to transport goods from one side of the country to the other. He wanted the country to expand into the West. Jefferson also believed that a waterway to the Pacific would open up new opportunities for trade with countries in Asia. Captains Lewis and Clark holding a council with the Indians. The area of North America that had been settled, explored, and cleared for new communities lay between the East Coast and Ohio. To venture beyond this area was to go into territory where only a handful of European fur trappers had been before. There were scary rumors and stories about hostile Native Americans and massive animals that lived in this unexplored wilderness. Lewis and Clark were up to the task. They were adventurous by nature, and they were careful observers of the land around them. They were also skilled cartographers, which is one of the reasons Jefferson chose them for the expedition. Cartographer, a person who makes maps. Shoshones, a Native American people of what is now the western United States. Throughout their remarkable journey, Lewis and Clark discovered and recorded in their journals 122 animals and 178 plants that were previously unknown to science. Along with their scientific observations, their accounts of the trail are filled with details of daily life and gives us a look at what it was like to spend 28 months in uncharted territory. William Clark. The Journals of Lewis and Clark. Here are a few examples of life on the trail from their journals. Notice the different way they spoke and spelled. July 30th, 1805. Having now secured my supper, I cooked my duck, which I found very good, and after eating it, laid down and should have had a comfortable night's lodge, but for the mosquitoes which infested me all night. August 2nd, 1805. We feasted sumptuously on our wild fruits, particularly the yellow currants and the deep purple service berries, which I found to be excellent. On our way we saw an abundance of deer and antelopes. Of the former we killed 2. We also saw many tracks of the elk and bear, no recent appearance of Indians. July 16, 1806. Saw a buffalo and sent Shannon to kill it. This buffalo proved to be very fat bull. I had most of the flesh brought on and a part of the skin to make moccasins for some of our lame horses, and put on their feet, which seems to relieve them very much in passing over the stony plains. Sacagawea. As a young girl, Sacagawea was taken from her Shoshone family by a raiding Indian party of Minetares. She eventually ended up the wife of Toussaint Charbonneau and accompanied him on the Lewis and Clark expedition. It is likely that Lewis and Clark were viewed as peaceful by Native American tribes because they had Sacagawea and her child with them. Sacagawea is only mentioned about 25 times in the extensive journals kept by the expedition, but the picture that emerges is one of a smart and helpful young woman. On top of her work as a translator, she taught Lewis and Clark about the nutritional and medicinal value of the native plants. Although Sacagawea clearly pulled her weight on this dangerous expedition, all the while caring for her infant son, she wasn't paid for her contributions. Throughout the expedition, Lewis and Clark had to be very resourceful and prepared for the unknown, so they brought along a sewing kit, carpentry tools, and a portable forge. Lewis and Clark hired Toussaint Charbonneau, a French trapper who was married to a young Shoshone woman named Sacagawea, to help them communicate with Native American tribes. First, Sacagawea would communicate with the Native Americans who spoke Shoshone. Then she would translate the Native Americans' words to French for her husband, and from there, her husband would translate the French to English for Lewis and Clark. A map created by Lewis and Clark that shows their route west. Meriwether Lewis. Sacagawea and Charbonneau's infant son, Jean-Baptiste, was with them on the journey. Throughout the journey, William Clark worked on a map of the expedition that was engraved and published in 1814. This map was very accurate, which was most impressive considering that he created it without the technology available to cartographers today. Mountain men and fur traders. Lewis and Clark weren't the only white men traveling through the Northwest in the early part of the 19th century. Hundreds of trappers probed the lakes and rivers of the West in their quest for beaver pelts, which were very popular during this time period in clothing and hats. Many fur trappers called themselves mountain men, most of them dressed in buckskin clothes they had sewn themselves, and in general they had a wild and unkempt appearance. These mountain men hunted for fur traders' companies. 2 of the most famous fur trading companies were the Missouri Fur Company based in St. Louis and the American Fur Company based in Astoria at the mouth of the Columbia River. A rival British company, the Hudson's Bay Company, was located at Fort Vancouver in what is now southwestern Washington. The fur companies would organize a rendezvous once a year during which the fur trappers would come to a central location to trade their skins for money and provisions. This rendezvous was also a time when fur trappers would trade gossip and wild stories. By about 1840, the beaver had been overtrapped in many areas, so it was much harder to find them. At the same time, European fashion changed and beaver top hats were no longer fashionable. For these reasons, many mountain men looked for a new line of work. Because they had an amazing knowledge of the West, many of them went on to become guides for the U.S. Army or for wagon trains. Clark's map and information about the Corps of Discovery expedition provided many American pioneers with details about where they were headed and what they'd find along the way. Unfortunately, after 1805, the powerful Native American Blackfoot Nation did not allow white travelers to pass through their territory in the northern plains, which included a portion of the trail that Lewis and Clark had mapped. So pioneers and mountain men were left to find a slightly different route. One of these routes became known as the Oregon Trail. John C. Fremont. John C. Fremont of the Army Topographical Corps led a surveying party of the region between the Missouri River and the Rocky Mountains in 1842. His surveying group was guided by mountain man Kit Carson. Thousands of Oregon Trail emigrants used Fremont's map and account of the expedition, which was published by Congress, as their guidebook to Oregon. Guidebooks. Aside from the maps made by Lewis and Clark and John C. Fremont, how did Easterners who didn't hire mountain men for guides research the routes that led to the West? There were many guidebooks published in the 19th century that told of the riches that lay across the Mississippi River. For example, in 1845, Josiah T. Marshall published Farmers and Emigrants' Handbook, being a full and complete guide for the farmer and the emigrant. This book was almost 500 pages long and contained a very vast variety of recipes, hints, tables, facts, etc. to aid the emigrant, whether male or female, in daily life. Marshall's book was very helpful to pioneers, but not all of the guidebooks were as well done. Some were created by authors and publishers who had not even been out west themselves, but who wanted to make a quick dollar. Usually these guidebooks were misleading about which routes to take and what you could expect to find at the end of the trail. The stories and information that Lewis and Clark brought back from their journey excited the imagination of many Americans. A map of the Oregon Trail. Tales of wide open land and of rivers overflowing with fish got people thinking about moving from the increasingly crowded east to this beautiful land stocked with food and opportunity. And over the course of the century, the lure of cheap land became an irresistible pull to thousands of Americans. The only question in the beginning was how to make this happen. Think about it. How do you cash in all your belongings and the life you have grown familiar with to trek across the country with your entire family to start over in a strange and wild place? Did you know? The Oregon Trail was a famous route used by many American pioneers. It stretched 2,000 miles west from jumping off places along the Missouri River. Make your own salt dough map. Make this three-dimensional map and you'll have a better appreciation and understanding of where the Oregon Trail went. Supplies. Maps of landforms of the United States. Piece of cardboard about 15 by 20 inches. Pencil. 2 cups of salt. 1 cup of flour. Water. Wax paper. Food coloring, blue, green, brown, black permanent marker, map of Oregon Trail. 1. Build a landforms map up to about 11 by 17 inches. Cut the outline of the United States out and trace around it on the cardboard with your pencil. Set aside. 2. Place the salt and flour in a bowl and add enough water to make a thick dough. Put the dough on a piece of waxed paper. Mix green food coloring into about 2/3 of the dough and divide the remaining dough into 2 piles and mix in brown food coloring in one and blue in the other. Green is for most of the country, brown for mountains, and blue for water. 3. Start making your three-dimensional map by putting green salt dough into the outline of the United States on your cardboard. Refer to your maps to see where the mountains, rivers, and lakes are. In these areas, build up your mountains with the brown salt dough and put blue where the lakes and rivers should be. Pay close attention to the geography of the western part of the United States and make sure you build the Rocky Mountains and put in the Great Salt Lake and some of the largest rivers like the Mississippi and the Missouri. 4. Let your map dry, then mark the path of the Oregon Trail from Independence, Missouri to Oregon with your black marker. Go to www.eduplace.com and click on the outline maps, then United States Physical, or go to www.worldatlas.com and keep clicking on North America and then United States to blow up the map. Go on a treasure hunt. This activity will give you some idea of how difficult it is to follow someone else's directions. Many pioneers were following directions written in guidebooks, giving information about where the trail went, where the good places were for water and grass, where rivers needed to be crossed out, etc. but often something got lost or misunderstood in the translation. Let's see how good you are at giving and then following directions. This is a two-part activity that requires at least 2 people or 2 teams. One person or team is responsible for hiding the treasures and making up the directions. The other team follows the clues and retrieves the treasures, then switch sides. Supplies: 10 big color plastic Easter eggs to hide things in, small candy like Hershey Kisses or jelly beans, trinkets like plastic rings or necklaces, small notebook, pencil. 1. Put the candy and trinkets inside the plastic egg so you have 10 treasures to hide. Decide how far you're going to go on the treasure hunt. Are you going to stay in the backyard or stay on one side of the street or on the playground so the seekers can't get too far off track? 2. The first team hides the eggs and makes up the clues, writing them down in the notebook. Be sure to include a lot of clues that rely on landmarks and directions. Clues can include things like how many steps it is from one egg to the next. Write something like, take 10 large steps towards Mrs. Jones's house, then turn to your right and take 4 tiny steps. Turn and face the big bush by the front window and look to your left. Don't make it too simple. 3. Give the notebook to the seekers and let them try to find all the eggs. After one team finds all the eggs, have that team re-hide them and make up new clues. Make your own pemmican. Pemmican was a traditional food eaten by Native Americans and adopted by the mountain men as they explored the frontier. The beauty of pemmican is that it was a high-energy portable food. You could just stick some in your pouch and be on your way. The original pemmican recipe used beer grease, but we'll leave that out of our recipe. Supplies: 2 ounces of beef jerky, kitchen mallet, cutting board, 4 dried apple slices, 1 handful of another dried fruit, maybe cranberries or raisins, pastry blender, wax paper, cookie sheet, rolling pin, plastic baggies. 1. Pound the beef jerky with the kitchen mallet on a cutting board until the jerky gets powdery. Add the dried fruit. With your pastry blender, chop and grind the dried fruit right into the jerky powder. You want to get the fruit and the meat as mixed as possible so that you end up with a meat-fruit paste. 2. Place a piece of waxed paper on your cookie sheet and spread the mixture onto it. Place another piece of waxed paper on top. With your rolling pin, flatten your pemmican so it's about ½ an inch thick. 3. Leave the wax paper on your pemmican and move the cookie sheet to a sunny place. Let it dry for a day or 2. At that point, break your pemmican into pieces and store it in plastic baggies until you are ready to eat this high-energy Native American food.